Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished Minister and other colleagues, welcome to this, which I consider one of the key sessions during this summit, because we're dealing with what the Prime Minister, in his remarks this morning, signaled out as one of the key priorities for the growth and development of India in the years to come, as he mentioned infrastructure. We have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to just introduce briefly the panelists, with the exception of Minister Kamal Nath, who everyone knows and who we'll ask for a special introduction in a moment from Mr. Greenhill. We have Robert Greenhill, who is the Managing Director and Chief Business Officer of the World Economic Forum. Who will be joining us. We have David Birch, who is the Regional Managing Director of Halcrow in the UK. David, welcome. We have Ajit Gulabchand, who's the Chairman and Managing Director of Hindustan Construction Company. Welcome to you, sir. We have Onkar Kanwar, Chairman of Artemis Health Science and Apollo Tyres. Welcome. We have Harpinder Narula, who's the Chairman of DSC India. Welcome to you. And we have, of course, the Minister, and we're looking forward to introducing him in a moment. Now, just to give you a quick introduction, in researching for this panel, I was struck by a comment from Minister Nath recently, where he put the finger on the issue of infrastructure in India, saying, the last decade was the decade of IT, where India was concerned. The next decade has to be the decade of infrastructure. And at the heart of that, apart from all the other things, the ports, logistics, energy, electricity, lies roads and highways, he said. And indeed, the 11th five-year plan from 2007 to 2012 envisages large investments in electricity, railways, roads, ports, airports, irrigation, urban and rural water supply and sanitation. And that's supposed to increase to about 9% of GDP, up from 5% in the previous five-year period. Now, obviously, if that's to be achieved, then the growth rates that the Prime Minister spoke about will have to be achieved, and we'll have to look for trend growth moving up from its already impressive level in a year of world crisis of 6.5 or 6.7% to a higher level. A couple of facts, not to crowd your minds with too many factoids, but again, you can imagine India is a big country with a lot to do, but let's just remind ourselves it has a road network of 3.3 million kilometres, including district and rural roads. And that's the second largest in the world. And India is huge on electricity generation, but there are deficits in power supply in terms of peak availability. The explosive growth in air traffic in this country has made it imperative also to rapidly expand the infrastructure to ensure safe and efficient handling of air traffic. The other thing I'd like to mention as we start is that Stephen Roach of Morgan Stanley, who has been pessimistic on almost every country and is a renowned pessimist and downer when it comes to macroeconomics, said, however, recently in an interview with the Economic Times, that the India growth story is now more compelling than ever before, and that he can see an Indian average growth GDP rate at 7.5 to 8.5% in the coming 2 years. But of course, his other key point, and I'm going to end my opening with this because it's quite provocative. Stephen Roach says India is a very balanced economy. The India story today is more compelling than ever before. It was not hard hit by the crisis. It continues to draw support from a micro story and FDI and infrastructure, still a major constraint. We're moving up from the bottom. So I'm positive about India, but you can't afford to be complacent. India has issues, and he lists various issues, including this one. If you'd listen carefully, Kamal Nath, if the government doesn't deliver on providing support to infrastructure, it could unravel what has been together up to now, which I think is an interesting comment. With that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Greenhill, who is going to introduce the Minister, and then we'll ask the Minister to give his opening address. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Minister Nath doesn't need any introduction, but perhaps I can give him instead a brief word of welcome. I think Alan laid out very convincingly the challenges we see on the roadside. There's the old saying from the Roman Empire that all roads lead to Rome, which leads to the question, could there have been Rome without roads? Can you actually have great powers develop without the lifelines provided by the road system? What was true 2,000 years ago is true perhaps even more today. And as many of you have seen, we had the competitiveness report just come out on India. It was released 2 days ago. Some very encouraging analyses on quantitative and qualitative factors in terms of areas such as business sophistication, use of technologies. But when executives were asked in a global poll, what were the key challenges for India? The number one priority, more than twice as important than the next highest priority, was in fact the underdeveloped state of infrastructure, of which roads was a key part of it. The second challenge they mentioned was what they perceived as an inefficient government bureaucracy. And what's interesting, and why we're so delighted to have the minister with us here today, is here's the person who will actually be ensuring that by dealing with the second issue, he can actually help us all address that first issue, which is the challenge of us working together to ensure that the challenges of India's roads can be addressed. Minister Nath has, of course, a very distinguished parliamentary career and also a very distinguished and effective career as minister, in terms of Minister of Textiles, then Environment and Forests, and of course, best known for Minister of Commerce in India and Industry over the last 5 years. And in fact, as of this year, has taken on this great challenge to help us all seize the great opportunity of India's sustained growth. So it's a great deal of pleasure that I invite to come to the stage the Can-Do Minister for Transportation, Minister Kamal Nath.
Thank you, Robert, for that introduction. And I'm delighted to be back at the India Economic Summit in Delhi. I've been here the last several years, and last year, when I was here, we were feeling the seismic tremors of the global financial system, or of the Western financial system, which was undergoing turbulence as never before. Well, India, from the last time we met, from the last time the India Economic Summit was held here, India continues on its growth trajectory. So what has changed? Even the government hasn't changed. We had an election. We don't have a new government. Sometimes people refer to it as a new government. We are the old government who came in with a stronger mandate. So what has changed? What really has changed is the new mandate which put upon us the great responsibility of delivering. In India, we had the first stage of reforms initiated, as you all know, many years ago by our present Prime Minister. The first stage of reforms was in trade and investment. And as the Prime Minister said this morning, we're going to continue in the calibrated reforms India had. When India embarked on its reforms, we had an India-specific model of liberalization, India-specific model of reforms. And in this India-specific model, we achieved our success demonstrated by the figures which slowly but surely we revved up. We didn't have any bubble to burst, as happened in many other parts of the world when they started their reform process. We were not a part of the Asian crisis, of the East Asian, of the Southeast Asian crisis. We rode over it. We didn't have the bubbles which burst in South America and Central America. So in India, the first part of our reforms was in trade and investment, which we continue in a calibrated manner, most of them having been done, some of them requiring to be done, but in a calibrated manner which are absorbed. Now, when I said what has changed is now we embark on our second stage of reforms. And the second stage of reforms, when we are on a growth trajectory, whether we are at 6.5 or 7, whether next year, as the Prime Minister has said, we'll be achieving much higher figures. The second stage of our reforms have to be reforms in governance. And along with reforms in governance has to be this great challenge in a complex country of inclusive growth. So when, Robert, you talk about infrastructure, we necessarily have to look at the biggest deficit which we have, and that is our infrastructure deficit. That's why I always say that we had a decade of IT, and now we're going to have a decade of infrastructure. That is our challenge. And as we grow towards this growth trajectory is the challenge of managing growth. Now, what do I mean by managing growth? We do have growth. We are at 6.5 plus. All those numbers will be there. But the challenge of managing growth, growth which is inclusive, growth which touches the lives of all sections of society in all parts of a country. And as a democracy, for the people of the country to feel the palpable sense that we are on this growth. You can't have 750 million people left behind. 300 million people less than $1 a day. Another 400 million people at $2 a day. You can't have these 750 million people left behind and not be a part of India's growth story. So now with a new mandate, the challenge of us is even more so in managing growth, embarking on our second stage of reforms, and in managing growth, all-inclusive growth. Now, when we talk of all-inclusive growth, obviously we have to look at infrastructure, whether it's in the power sector, whether it's in the airports, whether it's in the ports, and then my own responsibility of roads and highways. We can have a good port, we can have a good airport, but we need the road connectivity. And the ingredient, the strongest ingredient of all-inclusive growth is roads and highways. Because roads traverse all parts of the country, go through the most backward areas. Roads impact, as you all know, trade, industry, agriculture. As India being the second largest, sometimes I say it's the largest, but okay, second largest producer of fruits and vegetables, where 40% rot. As the largest producer of milk, the challenge is, again, our connectivity. So roads, cutting across the country, impacting everything. So roads covers the entire spectrum. And in this infrastructure deficit, the greatest problem is our road deficit. With, as was said, roughly 3.4 million kilometers of roads, our district roads, our state highways, our national highways. We have 71,000 kilometers of national highways. 16,500 are of a single lane. And you all know how many do we have which are 4-lane and 6-lane. So in this deficit, this is our biggest challenge, not merely in terms of connectivity. Connectivity, of course, is there. But along with connectivity is inclusive growth. And along with that is the economic stimulus outlays in roads provide. As has always been said, that wealth does not create roads. Roads create wealth. So as we embark on perhaps the biggest public-private partnership road building program in the world ever undertaken, the enormous challenge we have is in managing this. And roads, if we succeed, I looked around to see what would we need, what would make a visible difference, what would happen if you came 2 years later and you saw a country with a better infrastructure. What is that visible difference? And it was 7,000 kilometers was the minimum. So we said, okay, we'll set a target of 7,000 kilometers, which translates to 20 kilometers a day. To have 7,000 kilometers of roads you're going to have work in progress of 20,000 kilometers. Then only you'll be able to complete 7,000 kilometers. So the challenge, the capacity building to manage 20,000 kilometers of roads, which will be the work in progress, is perhaps the largest ever undertaken, and in a country which is driven by demographics, where our traffic calculations, what fails us, what has been failing us now is our traffic calculations, when I saw over the last 1 year, where we expect traffic to happen in 8 or 9 years, arrives in 1 or 2 years, because of demographics. A young population roaring to go. And before I conclude, I really want to comment on this, on Stephen Roche. Stephen Roche has written a new book, very interesting book. He sent it to me. But among the economists, normally, I always am in conflict with economists. But Stephen Roche is one economist who understood it all 3 years ago in Davos at the World Economic Forum. He could perhaps see the changes in the global economic architecture. And he believed so strongly in the changes which would take place with the new global economic architecture that he shifted to Hong Kong himself. And that shows how smart he was. Well, once again, I'm delighted to be here, back with you again, and we'd continue with the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Now, we're going to open the discussion up. I have a couple of questions for the Minister, but I also want to ask discussion leaders some questions. And I just want to repeat, in the spirit of being concrete and giving Klaus Schwab and the WEF the opportunity at the end of this 3-day meeting to have some solid conclusions about the subject of India's new highways, our contribution should be, one, just clarity on what are the facts. And that'll be things like, quite how much money are we talking about, Mr. Minister? How many billions of dollars of investment is required over the next 3 years to achieve your goals? A little bit of a fact check. Second, we want to ask all the players here their opinion of how we can achieve this. What are the modalities and what are the capabilities? And finally, third, we want to come out of this session with a sense of what are the actions that decision makers in both business and in government need to address to get this stuff done. Those are three very concrete goals. Let me start by asking Kamal, Nath, how much money needs to be invested? Just that question.
Well, very simply, we are talking about completing 7,000 kilometers. We are talking of $20 billion. $20 billion will be the investment required in roads to be able to do 7,000. And the enormity, not of this 20 billion, but of putting 20,000 kilometers of work in progress means that in the next 8 or 9 months, we'll be bidding out projects of $20 billion.
Okay, that's a straight answer. The second question is, because I really don't know this myself, and I'm sure it's of interest, how much of the money comes from government funds, public sector funds, and how much of it has to be raised by the private sector contractors or partners? Do you want to, shall I put that question to you, and then I'd like to hear also Ajit.
The 7,000, what we are looking at is about 55, 60%, I'd say, would be on PPP, would be on public-private partnership. Another 25% would be on annuity. So you're looking at 85% being raised by concessionaires in the private sector. They would have to raise this initially. In annuity, where it's going to be 25%, again, funds have to be raised. But in PPP, which will be 60%, so we are talking of $20 billion, 60% of that would be needed to be raised by the private sector.
Okay. Let me ask Ajit, who, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you the man behind the Sea Link in Bombay, the new wonderful Sea Link that gets you faster from the airport? Good. Well, then you have experience in this sector. You know the subject very well. Let me have an honest evaluation of your assessment of the debt financing and how that works to actually achieve these goals.
Well, the The National Highway Program is the world's biggest public-private partnership. A partnership on a scale that has not been attempted before. I don't mean only the public-private partnership where the private sector actually invests in the construction and operation of roads, but even otherwise, it's a very small body of National Highway Authority that actually conducts this huge operation through a variety of private sector players, from feasibility studies to project management to contractors that actually construct it, and a variety of services, including the very contract agreements that are made, have been made by private sector for the NHAI. So it is a wonderful experience of being able to create a department that can create such a large infrastructure in such a short time. So having said that, it already has created a new model of making infrastructure possible in such a short time. Now, having said that, when so much is to be relied upon private sector to come forth with money, a lot of study has been done. We have actually had this investment come forth in the last 7-8 years, and it needed a lot of tweaking because it wasn't working as well. It needed a lot more incentive for private sector to come forth with this money and to take the risks that are attendant with it. And I think that the minister has traveled around the world to understand from investors, to understand from concessionaires, construction companies around the world, in order to seek from them what they wish to see in concession agreements, what they wish to see in the management of concession contracts as well as construction contracts changed, what in government policy do they want changed, what in the banking policies they would like changed, so that these projects become attractive. And I think we are all waiting for him having, at the end of his journey, to come out with those changes in the policies which will tweak these contracts and make them more attractive. From whatever assurances have been given during the road shows that we did, and I had the privilege of joining him on them, was that we are seeing a much improved agreement which is going to be quite attractive, which de-risks most of them. So I see that as a given. I think it is not easy in the difficult circumstances of the downturn on one side. On the other side, there's a lot of money waiting to be invested, and these projects have to become attractive, and I see them becoming attractive. The other is actually having the construction capacity to do so. So for that, they are looking at much large-sized projects, and with large-sized projects, the opportunity for not only Indian players, but as well as foreign players to actually participate. There are lots of foreign companies participating, substantially by way of knowledge contribution rather than way of actual investments and actual construction contribution, which I think will forthcoming in this huge program. It is not a small program, as you pointed out, with 20,000 kilometers of work in progress to be achieved by the end of next year is a mammoth program and will require all these partnerships. We hope that the policy announcements and the structural changes that he's going to carry out are likely to create this. And I think we would really like to hear a little more from him, what he sees happening in that area.
Indeed. In fact, Minister, why don't you just pick up from there and tell us a little bit more about how this is supposed to work?
Well, I heard the financing, the international institutions who are looking at India as an investment destination. India will continue to be an important parking lot. To start with now, if India is a good parking lot, then within that parking lot, roads, how does it become a good slot? I heard various issues raised by companies across the world, by contracting companies, by financing. And having done that, I'm in the process of rectifying, of correcting some of the issues which were really the roadblocks for investment. I think during the course of this month, we would be able to announce them. And That being corrected, I wanted to hear everybody, get everybody's opinion. I talked to even the World Bank, I talked to the IFC, I got inputs from the IFC. Most of them will correct in November. There will be some issues which relate to the banking sector, to our Reserve Bank. There are some contentious issues. Those may take a little bit more time, but most of them will be corrected this month.
Okay, without giving away too many secrets, Minister, what are the areas that you're seeking to correct and that will be announced later this month? Just remind us.
Well, there is no secret because I think we've done it very transparently. I called all the contracting companies, I called all the institutions, and there were clauses in, as Ajit said, that there were clauses in our contractual agreements, which I thought really needed to go or needed to be corrected. Clauses like termination clause. Now, if some investor looks at an agreement and says, there's a termination clause, he says, you don't forget it. No, this is not what I want to look. That's the first clause he's going to look at, that I'll be told to take a walk at some point. We've corrected that. We don't want it to be a termination clause. So there's comfort. And I asked the investors, that, what would you like to see? Give me your draft. And they gave me the draft. So we are building that in. There were things like exit clauses. While you're building a road, in a PPP road, you have a construction risk. Then there's a post-construction risk. There's a question of debt, equity, or pension funds, or insurance funds, or whatever it is. You want contractors to exit. All contractors don't want to be concessionaires. You want contractors to exit. Should we allow them to exit? Previously, we wouldn't let them exit. We said, you've got to be there for the almost entire period of the concession period. We are providing an exit clause. There were issues like conflict of interest. That was a very tight clause, conflict of interest, because when you find an international financial institution, I had somebody come to me and said that 2 years ago you came to my country and you said that we must look at India. We came to India and got disqualified. There were conflict of interest. They are in so many areas and they run into issues of conflict of interest. We don't want cartelization, but we don't want it to become so tight that people get out. So the bigger players, then we are looking at, as Ajit said, mega projects, to get in the best practices, to get in the best standards. Mega projects of $1 billion. We don't want to bid out 20 kilometers and 50 kilometers. So we are looking at something like in excess of 400, 500, even 600 kilometers. Mega projects of over $1 billion, where we will attract, they will have very strong qualifications. So they'll bring in the best technologies, the best practices to upgrade our own contracting industry.
Good. Clearly, the ability to actually get the contracts done to mutually satisfactory, it seems so basic, but just to take a small example of contracts and practices in India that didn't work a few years ago and now do work, I remember when this minister in his previous capacity was dealing with international retailers, I believe, fashion and other retailers who couldn't have certain levels of foreign ownership in Indian companies or properties below 51%, above 51%. That blocked investment by a lot of international brands. I believe that was dealt with a few years ago, and now they're here, and there's cooperation with Indian companies. So the good news is we have a minister who knows how to get things done. The bad news is this is not easy, and even the minister must admit that achieving the contracting capability is not like that, is it, sir?
That's true. And, you know, we must sometimes comparisons are made with other countries, smaller countries, or people compare us with China, that China gets it done so fast. I always say that China has its own genius. We have our own genius. We are not only the largest democracy, we are the rowdiest democracy. And in this, we have to encompass all kinds of views in this. So it's very difficult when you talk of retail. It's really never been a question of FDI. You know, the question was big versus small. What works, big or small? There was a question of wholesale retail. One of my friends is sitting here. We slowly embarked on it. Now, again, it's a milestone by milestone process.
Okay.
But we are at it.
Right. Let me turn to Harpinder Narula for a moment, because apart from being chairman of DSC, he sits on a couple of interesting committees. One is the Infrastructure Coordination Committee, and the other, which must be a slightly sad experience, is the 2001 Commonwealth Games Organizing Committee with Suresh, because the Commonwealth Committee has worked for years to try to raise money, and I remember the Chief Minister of Delhi years ago, Sheila Dikshit, saying, we're going to raise $100 billion, this is 4 years ago, for the Commonwealth Games in 2010, and Suresh and others saying it's going to be there. And I think the Commonwealth Games Organizing Committee has been weak and hasn't really delivered. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the perhaps more important issue of infrastructure. Can you give a little report card on, do you agree with the minister's relative optimism? Do you feel there are other obstacles? What's your opinion?
See, I have been in this country for the last 5 years, and one of the primary areas that I have been involved is road building. We have had in hand about 500 kilometers of road, and out of that we have built about 70% of the roads. To be very fair, when the minister took over, and his first remark was that he's going to build 20 kilometers of road, I must admit, I thought how, because I had 5-6 years of experience. But having seen the minister in action for the last 3-4 months, having traveled with him to all the different destinations where he was a very listening person, and one of the points which I think has been also lost out on everyone's attention is how to make them bankable. But I think minister has also focused a lot on all the other stakeholders which benefit or are affected by whatever is being built. And that's a very important thing. And if you go around anywhere within the ministry now, the buzzword is can-do culture, because that's what he has brought in. And I must admit, I wasn't that optimistic when it began, but I think now the way it is, all the stakeholders' ideas have been taken into account, and the way minister is addressing them, it is going to be possible, and India is going to definitely be able to deliver. While talking of China, as the minister mentioned, I was last 2 months back in China for the Dalian World Economic Forum Summit, and my wife was with me, and I told her, you know, look at this infrastructure, we are at least 30 years behind in our infrastructure. She says, yeah, that's all right, but tell me something, would you want our children to grow up in China or in India? Do you want them to be in a democracy, or do you want them to be whatever system in China is? So I said, you're right. So we have to pay some price of being, as the minister said, our democracy, and you know, things get done, but they get done as we go along.
If I could just interrupt and ask you to remember that 1971 is a long time ago, and the force of Chindia in the world economy, of India and China together in the 21st century, once you get to be good friends and work better together, could be amazing. Do you agree with that or disagree? It's sort of a
Sorry,
question.
I just missed
Good friends.
Instead of setting China and India apart,
China and
if you
India.
cooperate in future, couldn't that be a good thing?
Well, I don't know how much we can cooperate on the roads. I think they are building faster roads on the border than perhaps we are. we want to connect up with those roads, but I guess they are already there where they shouldn't be, but that's another question.
Moving right along then, if I may. Did you want to finish your...
I think the other thing is, this thing is, the minister has been able to bring in an attitudinal change, because a PPP concept took a lot of time. I mean, I'm giving you the time I began. We were asked on our first project, how much of the grant do you need for doing a particular PPP project? And we canceled that and said, we want to give you so much money for doing the project. So at that particular time, the government also didn't understand that there could be a policy of negative grant. And I think that was the beginning of the process where government has started collecting now money in this PPP process. And, sorry?
Mr. Minister, did you
Well,
want to
I
jump
think
in?
what you're not saying is that you're doing a PPP project and what you're not even saying more is how much money you're making. So
Minister, if I wasn't
that's the
making
point you
money,
should be making, you know.
There we go.
I am
How much money are you
absolutely-
making, Mr. Narula?
I have never denied this, that I think that whatever you do as a pioneer has its pitfalls. You could land up in trouble, you could not make any money. The whole process has taken its time. I don't think so that PPP, as is being planned out in India, has now any negative sides. People will make money if they are willing to stick out their neck and come to India.
Okay, why don't we take that as a no comment from Mr. Narula?
No, we want you to make money. You know, we want you to make money because you are our resource base. You know, without you, we can't build our roads. You know. So, what perhaps we need to tell the world a bit more and the financiers a bit more are that there are. It is a profitable proposition. We got to say that we have good quality construction, we got good contracting companies, and in a PPP model, the revenues is not in doubt because nobody in this room will doubt traffic on our road. So traffic is the revenue, and traffic can only increase. There's no traffic threat, which is in other countries. As all those who build PPPs, and as you know the most, that traffic, what you envisaged in your own calculations to happen many years later, happened many, many years earlier. You know, so that is the point, really.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question because I really want to, I think this is a good discussion, but I want to get as precise as possible in our last 15, 20 minutes. So before we get to our last question area, which will be what needs to be done for business and government, I want to ask Mr. Birch and I want to ask Mr. Kanwar, starting with both of them, and then the others, the following question. We've understood that India has bold ambitions. We've understood that GDP growth comes from this. We've understood that the minister is going to work to improve the contracting process and content of contracts to make them more friendly to the international and domestic investment community and to get things done. And we also have skirted over the issue, which I'd ask people to comment on, is we know there's a global credit crunch. We know there's a statistical recovery in America and Europe and a stronger recovery in Asia. But, will the funds be there, even though India, yes, is a strong magnet for the future? How confident are you that through whatever mechanism, debt finance or others, the funds will be attracted once the contractual bits are done, meaning the return on investment needs to be interesting enough? So I don't know. Ajit, Mr. Kanwar first, and then
I just have one comment. Actually, as far as the funds are concerned, people are looking for the market access. India is offering the market access today in this world. Our biggest challenge is going to be, we have a very dynamic minister. He's got a very ambitious plans. If we have to achieve 20 kilometers, he has to have special purpose vehicles where he can make sure, let us say that he wants talking of 17,000 or 20,000. We need all kind of clearances. He should have this purpose vehicle available so that contractors can be invited and said, okay, this is the penalty and this is the reward. This is the timelines. If we really, truly want to implement, important thing is this special purpose vehicle should get all kind of clearances. Because in India, you have to get clearances from state, you have to get from various defense ministries, railways, municipalities. So even with the best of intentions, people will delay the projects. It will happen. But if we really want to become a global player in terms of really creating global standards of highways, it will be important to see really basically to correct these things. While processes are being corrected, I think the biggest challenge would be to see that we have this 10,000 kilometers and we have all the clearances. You don't need a clearance. Please come and build the road. And these are the terms and conditions. If those things are created, I think this 20, I don't think 20, but we'll be able to achieve 30 kilometers. But what's happening is today, there are a lot of delays take place while intentions are good, processes have been done. At the same time, another suggestion would be, we have ADR, that is alternate dispute resolution. There we need to have timelines, that if there are problems, this has to be resolved in so much time.
See, this is a fascinating comment, this one, because we are sitting in a room with friends of India, businessmen and others interested in India, people in this room who would like to invest, who would like to be part of the infrastructure development and highways, and who are the same people who, as friends of India, we'll go around the world and hear people say, well, the great country, but the infrastructure is lousy, and my God, the bureaucracy is impossible when you're trying to do contracts. And things get delayed, and they don't always honor payments and stuff like that. That's what you hear internationally, if we're honest. Kamal, Nath, and then David Birch. Well, actually, maybe ask the minister to wait a minute. Let's gather up a couple of more comments. David Birch, how severe or unfair was what I just said, and what does the minister still have to do, and how confident are you?
Well, first let me join the others in congratulating the minister. You referred to the minister in the opening remarks as a can-do minister, but I think both Ajit and HS have also pointed out that he's been a listening minister. He hasn't dived in and tried to push this program straight out because he's recognized that fundamentally before there were flaws and issues with it. If you're trying to attract finance, if you're trying to attract investors, either from India or overseas, for what we're suggesting is perhaps the largest PPP project in the world, contracts are going to have to be fair. Conditions are going to have to be fair. And these were the issues before, and these are, I think, the issues that people are raising out. Now, in the last month or so, a little over, there have been a number of articles in the press in which the minister has been showing how he is tilting the favor of the concession agreements to a much fairer position than they were before. And I think that that is going to make a huge difference, and I think it will be very attractive. And I've had the opportunity over the last 2 weeks, actually, to talk to a number of the largest road investors in the country. And I get the impression that they are now very gung-ho. They are now very interested. So he's made a significant change. But there are a number of issues that still seem to remain. And if I might be allowed to press the minister a little to raise a couple of those issues in 2 blocks, 4 issues in 2 blocks. If
Go for it.
okay.
This is your opportunity. The whole world is watching.
The first 2 are the issue of land and how that's going to be dealt with. In the past, there have been huge project delays in the acquiring of land for highways. 20,000 kilometers work in progress means buying the land strips for 20,000 kilometers of land, and that's a difficult issue in India. So how is this going to be handled so that concession companies can be assured that that's not going to be a risk? I haven't seen an answer to that.
And with social equity and inclusiveness.
And the second one, and the first block, which are the sort of hard financial issues for investors, is what if you're not involved with it may seem a very odd thing. It's the cost of the project and how it's defined. The National Highway Authority does studies and defines what the cost of a project is. The viability gap finance is then defined on that level of cost. Often the debt that's raised is also defined on that level of cost. If the developer then comes in and finds the road costs a lot more, he's actually lumbered with the balance of that cost. And this is still a risk, as far as I can see, remaining in the program for developers. So could I ask the minister if you could respond to those 2?
Yeah, and before we ask the minister to respond to that, let me just get an endorsement from Ajit. Sea-Link had a cost overrun of a substantial nature, so that's an important issue, isn't it, for infrastructure projects?
There are some. The problems are what the road ministry can address, I think, is being addressed. But there are certain reforms that are required outside the road ministry for the success of this project. One is the banking policy. We do not have what is known as project finance in this country. You will often hear the word project finance, but it only means financing a project. That is what is called project finance. Because it is always with some recourse, limited or otherwise, to the sponsors of the PPP project. And I think this is because the Reserve Bank of India does not consider securitized finance as a tangible asset. And therefore, all banks have to treat it as unsecured loan and create certain issues in terms of provisioning. And I think this needs to change. We have to come to the issue of project finance, where it is without recourse to the sponsors for the success of PPP. This lies outside the realm of the road ministry and calls for RBI and others to. And the second is dispute resolution. For some reason or the other, there is a reluctance to take serious decisions to solve problems, even though they are written down in the contract. And this is a way of doing things that we will need to change, a mindset change which is not easy to bring about. And mind you, yes, those disputes go all the way to the high courts and Supreme Courts through arbitration processes. And whilst the bad news is that all this happens all the time, and how are we going to solve it? The good news is that most private sector wins in courts because these disputes are created. The courts are fortunately very free in this country. It may take some time, but you do get justice. And I think these two issues, which lie substantially outside, one because it's a mindset problem, and the other because it is in the area of monetary finance in the hands of RBI, I think the minister would like to address that because he needs to be very aggressive to get them done.
Okay. And in a moment, I will ask the minister. I've got land, I've got cost of project, I've got project finance, and I've got dispute resolution. 4 issues so far, Minister. But before you speak, Harpinder, do you want to add a fifth?
No, I just wanted, on David's point of land acquisition. See, David, my understanding is that there is an act of parliament under which land can be acquired for road building anywhere in India, I mean, within that act. And that is being implemented initially because of the state's cooperation, it wasn't happening that much. So that really is not an issue. The big issue is, which you said, Ajit said on dispute resolution. I mean, we have heard the minister talk in all the forums, and I think a lot of steps are being done. But I guess sooner it is done, it will allay a lot of fears of the foreign investors that they will think there is a very quick resolution to these things.
Good. Okay, Kamal Nath, land, cost of project, project finance and the banks, and dispute resolution. Give us the solutions, please.
Well, I thought I'd be asked some tougher things, but anyway. I start with land. True. If you don't have land, you can't build a road. Now, we have the National Highway Authority Act, and this enables you to acquire land. The process, when I looked at this process, David, I found that it took 18 months because 3 times the file and the papers would come to my ministry. And it would come to me to acquire the land. I said, why can't we shorten this? So, last week, we have put into place a system which brings down the time from 18 to 8 months, number one. Number two, we've said no project can be awarded unless 80% of the land is in your possession. So until and unless I have 80% of land in my possession, and for the balance 20%, the last notification has been issued, we won't award the project. Now that puts a lot of pressure on our project directors. I review land acquisition every 3 months. In the last meeting, I want to say this with all humbleness, then the last meeting of project directors, I sent 3 project directors out, because I know exactly how much land they are acquiring. The seriousness with which this process was undertaken was very bad. Land being acquired in it's linear construction, so you're dealing with a set of officers here, a set of officers 15 kilometers down, another set of officers 40 kilometers down. It was at the lowest levels. I've talked to the chief ministers, and I've told the chief ministers that if you don't want the road, forget it. Now, every single state is hungry for the roads. The roads pass through all the states. So land acquisition and enabling land acquisition, I think, is streamlined. Every 3 months, I'm reviewing it. There is an absolute quantum jump on this. In my work program for 2010-11, that means bids which we will invite next year, we've started the land acquisition process now. So that is undergoing a paradigm shift. A very important point, David, you made, and for those who are not in this business will not understand it. And most of them here are not in this business. But very simply put, is when we invite a bid, we say this is the total project cost. How do we arrive at that? The consultants. The consultants give us the total project cost. And I must confess that we've never got our total project cost right. I had a meeting of all the consultants, and I asked them in a hall like this, that can you tell me which one of you has got your project cost right or even wrong by about 5%? Not one of them could raise their hand. You know that. So our project cost has been wrong because the content of our feasibility studies has been wrong. That was the basic thing. And you told me this, when we started. So we are now giving serious attention to this. Consultants have been told in our DPRs, in our detailed project reports, or in our feasibility studies, if your TPC is wrong, we find, why should project cost be right? For those of you not in this business, because when we give a subsidy, when the bids are invited on the base of a subsidy. So somebody says, I want 30% subsidy. That's based on a total project cost. Somebody says, I want 25. Obviously, the one who wants the lesser subsidy is a better bid. But if your total project cost is wrong, he calculates his subsidy on a real cost rather than a total project cost. And that's where we go wrong. So this is an area which I don't think we're going to complain. Then people are not going to complain in the future. We have given adequate attention to. Dispute resolution, very important. We got a huge amount, I don't know, $1 billion or $1.5 billion stuck in dispute resolution. Of course, I'd like to see that our contracting companies are employing more engineers than lawyers. We don't want a situation that they're going to employ more lawyers than engineers. In this, we are working on a system. Even in the next 3 days, I'm looking at what the World Bank says in this, what does the IFC says in this, to arrive at a fair and equitable dispute resolution, because when claims are there, claims is a reimbursement. Claims is not to make profit. We don't want a system to start that people bid low, then make claims to make profit. So we are working on a new process so that dispute resolution, understand that unless you have a good dispute resolution, even the financing is going to be a problem. So dispute resolution, we have put into place. The Prime Minister has appointed a committee under the member of the Planning Commission at my suggestion to bring together all the interests to decide on what should be a proper dispute resolution mechanism where you don't have to go to court, it's settled at the field level, or worse, it ends at arbitration. We come to banking, project finance. Yes, there are issues. In this, interministerial issues. Now again, the cabinet. In the cabinet, the Prime Minister decided that this has to end. It cannot continue in perpetuity, one view here and one view there. So he's created a cabinet committee, an EGOM, what we call an empowered group of ministers, which consists of the finance minister, myself, and the vice chairman of the planning commission, just 3. So there's not 20 people trying to find a solution. And whatever this EGOM decides, this empowered group of ministers decide, that's it. And if we have to build 7,000 kilometers, it's not my target alone. The Prime Minister announced this on Independence Day from the Red Fort as a specific target for the nation. Well, all government departments, all ministries must fall in line to enable it. And I'm very clear in this. So this new mechanism of decision-making, interministerial decision-making, normally interministerial processes or difference of views goes to the cabinet or goes to the Prime Minister in our form of governance. But in this case, a separate group has been formed to arrive at a decision. So I think we are on the right track. I'm not on 20 kilometers a day as yet, but we are heading towards that. We were doing 2 point something. Now we were talking about giving it a 10-fold jump. We are exceeding, we've gone beyond doubling it. We had the monsoons. I think that next month we'll go to about 8 kilometers, 8 or 9. In July, we did 10, then we had the monsoons, and as you know, the monsoons construction is very weak. So we are slowly heading towards this, and I think in March, we will be doing 20 kilometers a day.
Okay, thank you for that. Ajit, you want to add?
Minister, can I ask you a question? This is such a fantastic program. It was begun with great ardor on your part. What about this program that really keeps you awake at night?
Well,
There must be something that keeps you awake.
you know, when I
at night.
calculate 20 hours a day, 20 kilometers a day, it means how many hours a day, how many kilometers an hour. So now I keep calculating my life in kilometers instead of hours. In my previous job, that's the difference. In my previous job, which was highly conceptual, in a conceptual job, even talking is progress. But in this job, talking is not progress.
That's true. A lot more micro than macro here. Harpinder, did you want to add anything? You're okay. David, do you want to tell us that you're satisfied or dissatisfied with the minister's responses? David? Speak to the microphone, please.
Thank you. Yes, and I know he's trying to deal with all the issues. Can I bring up one small issue, which I brought up with the minister before, so I know he won't be surprised, which is, you know, in this road program, we are building India. We are building what India is going to look like, urban and rural, for the next 30, 40 years. And nowhere in the documents, nowhere in the consideration is aesthetics. Nobody seems to be worrying about what the bridges look like, what the roads really look like. And I think India deserves.
So is that a question or a statement?
It's a statement, but perhaps a response from the minister.
Well, please say this as loudly as you can, because I have been saying this, and for the first time we hired consultants. We hired consultants for the aesthetics. You know, the aesthetics just does not mean planting trees or making it look good. It means that, but it means wayside facilities. Those who build roads, in my ministry, we don't have the skills to even understand it. That what are roadside facilities? What will help people moving? We have appointed consultants in this. Now, before we conclude, I want to just say one more thing, is that as those in this business know it, we have now set up, a few days ago, an expressway division. We are looking at expressways. We have put on the internet what expressways we are going to see. These are going to be greenfield. I hope that next year we can set up a separate expressway authority, which is going to have its own method of financing as in other parts of the world. Access controlled, and so expressways is the next big thing on our plate.
Okay. Well, my job as moderator is to wrap up in 2 or 3 minutes what we've done today, and I'm pleased, I don't know if the audience is, because for once, this wasn't about lofty rhetoric. This was about the mechanics of getting something done that's very important to India's economy, one of the key areas of growth. We certainly heard about the issues concerning contracts and finance. I think we are in rough agreement that while finance is never an easy thing, India remains attractive enough to the world at a time of recovery to make finance something that is more an issue of organization than of lack of interest. I don't think there'll be a lack of interest internationally. I think in terms of the contracts, the minister has his work cut out for him. I think there's a lot of detail, a lot of devil in the detail, a lot of process, a lot of dispute resolution and approvals and issues like that. But I'm convinced from my knowledge of the last 10 years of governments in India, that if there's one minister who can get this done, he's sitting right here. I mean, this is the man. So, you know, so I predict that because he says he'll get it all done, and we are in India, no matter how great it is, my prediction is that 1 year from now, we'll be here, he will have achieved 2/3 to 75% of his goals, not 100%. And that will be extraordinary in India, to have achieved 75% 1 year from now of what he sets out to do. And for the rest of it, I think we all understand this is critical to India's economy. Thank you for joining us today. All the best.